Marco.
Sean.
What happens when the pilot deflates?
What happened is now it sounds like you're talking to me from the other side of the moon. It's like getting
Is it not that
getting a delay and everything. Well, try again. We're just fighting a blind spot, I guess.
That's
so
right.
What happened when?
What happens when the pilot deflates?
Oh, I don't know. That's a question that people that are watching the video probably can kind of like figure out right now. And the people listening to the podcast are like, what the hell is Sean talking about? Reason is that, we are on Airplane, on the set of the movie Airplane, if you remember that. One of the classics that I can't pass out. Whenever I saw it, I have to watch it. I don't know why. Maybe,
when it's on,
maybe being a kids of the 80s, you have to. It's the rule, it's the law. Exactly. But no, Sean, this is
the answer to the riddle. You want it?
Yeah.
Technology takes over. Let the pilot deflate. Who cares? Everything's going to fly itself. Safely and securely.
Ouch. I don't know. Maybe the guest wants to say something about this right away. Ken,
I know
feel free to jump in. Feel free to jump in on this.
So why the heck do I have Otto, the autopilot, sat behind me? Well, first of all, like you, I'm a huge fan of Airplane, the movie too, but also I'm a pilot myself. And when we started looking at Airplane Cyber, I found a custom Otto, and I had to have him, mostly to get some gags. But do you know what? People turn up to see us at trade booths, and everyone just wants a photograph with the autopilot, right?
Why not?
Exactly.
He's a big character. It's kind of like, like sometimes you have those TV shows. Bring an example, like The Mandalorian. I don't know if you're a fan of that, but it became all about Baby Yoda, Grogu, right? But it wasn't the plan. It's just like he took over. I think like Otto did the same thing on Airplane. People love him. They know who he is. Maybe they don't remember the actor. So I don't know.
So I have to confess, he does have a little air leak, and the team that manufactured him, of course, put the top-up valves in the right place.
Oh, yeah.
so it does lead to some awkward moments when you find him, I don't know, getting a little floppy. Have to spend a private moment reinflating him.
He's Hollywood approved construction now.
Absolutely.
Follows the set. Well, listen, folks are listening and watching. They can see your name on the screen, not your last name, though. And those only listening have no idea who you are, perhaps, unless they can recognize your voice, which I'm impressed that they can do that. But I'm thrilled to have you on again, Ken Munro from Pen Test Partners. We met you many years ago at Black Hat in DEF CON, I guess more appropriately in Las Vegas, and have paid attention to what you're doing with your own work and with that of the Aerospace Village, and thrilled to have you on the show today. Maybe a few words for our audience who haven't connected with you yet, Ken. Who you are, what you're up to, why the world of cyber. You kind of touched on a little bit, but cyber and aerospace.
Yeah, for sure. So this is kind of a COVID story, actually. One of the awful things that happened to the aviation industry during the COVID lockdowns, that a lot of airplanes got retired a lot sooner than people thought. A lot of the 747 fleet, for example, nearly the whole world over was retired, which meant that all the airplane scrapyards, the boneyards, they got backed up. Airplanes have value. The bits have got value. And that June, July of the first COVID lockdown, we rang a boneyard and said, "Hey, what's going on?" And they said, "Well, we've got several years' work lined up to take these airplanes apart." So we said, "Well, what happens to them in the meantime?" And they said, "Nothing." I said, "Look, if we gave you some money, can we power them up and learn about the cybersecurity of airplanes?" They're like, "Yep. Come and knock yourselves out." So put some fuel in there, started the APU, got some ground power on, and airplanes that were perfectly serviceable in late March of 2020 were powered up, and we got to have a crack at them. And we learned a shed load about airplane cyber.
That's an incredible story. I had no idea that was going on. Now, were these not that it really matters, but were these boneyards in the UK or in America?
Yeah, we have a few. I think we've got 3 or 4 locations where airplanes get parted out over here. And it's fascinating talking to boneyards themselves, because, like you probably know, most airplanes are owned by finance companies, and there is a spreadsheet for each airplane where the current cost of all the parts used is added up, and as soon as the cost of the parts exceeds the cost of the airframe, it gets parted out, it gets broken up. So it's incredible. But yeah, just headed down to a boneyard and got our hands dirty, literally. Yeah.
So here I have a question, right? So you're talking about you're going and do autopsy on a body that is already, is not alive anymore. And I'm going a little morbid here, but the picture that I'm thinking is, if they're ready to retire, they are in a yard where they don't fly anymore. Aren't they already old? Aren't we talking about how are you doing cybersecurity research on the new technology? Because I'm guessing I would say, well, that's the way they used to do it. How about now? So tell me about that.
That's a massive challenge, actually. So the biggest problem is you can't go and pen test an airplane. It doesn't work. You don't get permission, quite rightly so. And also, airplane software is certified. Obviously, it has to be super safe. And just turning up and throwing some scans at an airplane, you could risk the safety of that airplane. So we have to work on airplanes that have been retired. But, an airplane that's 10 years old, there's still a lot of them flying around. So something that's 10 years old is still not quite state of the art, but it's still very, very current. You probably know that the first Airbus A380s are being parted out right now. Lots of 747s. I think the newest 747 we worked on has been 27 years old, but we worked on an A320 and a Boeing 737 that were just over 10 years old. So, yeah, they're old, but lots of those airplanes are still flying with exactly the same components in them. So I think it's still valuable research. I'd love to get hold of some brand new equipment, but yeah, just going out and buying a brand new 737 is kind of not in our budget, right?
And actually, I have another question, Sean, if you don't mind. I mean, because I have a personal experience here, which is when I got lucky to get to see the Armstrong Flight Center here in LA, in Pasadena, and they were about to take off with the DC-10. That they were just telling me that it was 50 years old, but they transformed it into. It's a lab. It's a weather lab. They were flying to Hawaii to check out storms and stuff like that. And I was like, wow, you trust this plane for that? It's 50 years old. It's like, yeah, well, it's really, and nothing is really 50 years old on this one because you constantly update it. So is that part of the trick why, all these airplanes, they keep flying, and why it's still relevant to look into retired airplane?
So I can think of a 747 we were looking at that was last flying in the middle of March 2020. We got access to it about a year after it was retired. But even then, some of the components, so some of the avionics, were almost brand new because they've been replaced. So airplanes get upgraded, they get fixed, they get latest systems applied. They're often a bit piecemeal. So this bit fails, so they get a new one of those because it's expensive to refit an airplane. But yeah, you're right. So you do see really old airplanes flying with some quite current equipment in them.
And not too deep, but talk to us a little bit about I'll call it the infrastructure, or the ecosystem of these components. Because you're talking about some of them being updated, some of them being old, but in between it are the networks and the protocols and the actual traffic, and then obviously the data itself. And I presume that there's a lot of common wisdom that you can gain regardless of what version a component is, right? So maybe what are some of the components, and how does that picture look to you?
Yeah, so there are 3 broad types of network on an airplane. So the bit up front that does the pilots interact with, that does the flight controls, it's called the aircraft control domain, and that is a super safe, super secure part of the airplane. It's not really linked to anything else. Whilst you can get a feed of your airspeed for your in-flight entertainment system, so you know where you are, there's actually a one-way data diode between the dirty bit of the plane back where we sit and the pilots where it's super safe up front. Now, there are broadly 3 types of networks. So most airplanes use a network protocol called ARINC 429, which isn't really a network as such. It's more of a lot of point-to-point wiring. So you got a lot of pins coming out of the various avionics, and they'll have a path where they go to another avionic or into the cockpit. But that means you get a lot of weight of wires, right? It's been around for a long time. It's used on most airplanes that you go on. There is another protocol that's called ARINC 629. That's used almost exclusively by the Boeing 777. That was an evolution. It's an inductively coupled bus network, and that was a big step forward to try and reduce the weight of cabling. But it kind of didn't go any further than the 777. And now we have in the Airbus A380, the Boeing 787, we have a network that's probably more familiar to the ones that you and I are familiar with, which is called AFDX, and that's actually an Ethernet-based network. Doesn't use IP as such, but it does use Ethernet, but it'd be much more familiar to us all as regular ground-based network engineers. So yeah, there are some very distinct network types on planes depending on what type of airplane you're flying and how old it is to a point too.
And then the network connects to, so you talked about the avionics, which are, I would imagine, the hubs that kind of shift, and the switches in IT world, perhaps. And then there are endpoints, engines and sensors on the engines, and maybe an overview of that to kind of paint a picture for folks.
Yeah, so there's a lot of information coming to and from. There's a lot of cabling, a lot of wiring. If you go into the avionics bay of any current airplane, it is absolutely rammed full of big, heavy, expensive boxes, each one of which got a particular function, for like the airspeed computer or one of the flight control computers. Each one's got a really heavy, expensive box. They're called line replaceable units. Each one weighs 20, 30 kilograms, and they're called line replaceable because it means that if something goes wrong, the engineer on the ground can come along with a new one, pull it out, put the new one back in, and you're flying again straight away. And then they're sent off to be repaired. So you're not delaying the airplane because something's gone wrong. They all communicate, they all interoperate, they all have some pretty robust networks on them to make sure that when the pilot says go down, the airplane goes down, right? Now, of course, that's what everyone speculated about for years, was, can I hack the airplane from my seat back in the cabin? Right, that's what everyone wants to know, right?
Yeah, let's talk about that. I don't know. This is actually the topic of what you're presenting at RSA. So
so simple answer: no, you can't.
No. So
no.
End of the podcast. No.
But that would be a very boring podcast, right?
Tell me why. Tell me why.
Okay, so first of all, those networks are very carefully segregated. So back in the cabin, it's called the Passenger Information Entertainment Services domain. It's really long, but it's the dirty bit where we sit and we watch movies. We can stream from the internet. We can send our emails. It's dirty. It's not considered trustworthy at all by the airplane manufacturers or operators, right? That's for us to do whatever we want to do on our tablets and our laptops. It doesn't connect into the safety systems, right? It's basically isolated. There is often some interfacing into the sort of the halfway house, which is some of the systems the cabin crew can use. So, for example, on a 747, there was a little cupboard under the stairs where there's a cabin management terminal where the chief crew member in the cabin can send ground messages and stuff. And often more modern planes will see a flight attendants panel, and one of those will be more featured. But even that, it still doesn't really talk to the safety systems on the plane. So there's a very distinct separation, and quite rightly so. I think we'd all be quite concerned if we could sit there instead of watching a movie, go, "Hey, let's control the plane," right?
I know. Maybe people sometimes they think they can because they show you like the camera in front of the plane or from the tail and then like, oh wow, I'm really actually getting into the action here. But it's just it's an Hollywood thing, right? So is there a way to hack a plane though?
Well, yeah. So there've been a bunch of media stories over the years about the concept of doing this, and there's been some really interesting work done, but it still doesn't, to my mind, make an airplane hackable from the passenger cabin. If you're going to do something to affect an airplane, you need to be in a position of physical trust. Okay, so there's cabling that runs through the cabin walls and the overheads and stuff. If you were extremely skilled and had all the right equipment and could get into the overhead space or the walls without anybody noticing, kind of maybe, but I just don't see that as a practical attack. I suppose if you were a rogue ground engineer and you had access to the avionics bay, you could cause some problems. But really, the airplane would probably throw some errors and the pilots wouldn't want to take off. So to all intents and purposes, you just don't hack an airplane from the passenger cabin. It's not how it works. But over the last few years, we've spent quite a bit of time looking at the systems that feed information to the pilots.
Mm.
Now, the point you made that you raised at the very beginning, we don't need pilots, right? Planes can fly themselves. Yeah, they can. They can fly themselves.
Until
But it's when stuff goes wrong is you really, really want someone up front who's got a vested interest in that airplane landing again, right? That's why I personally really don't like the idea of an autonomous plane, because when there's pilots up front, there's someone whose vested interest is absolutely getting me on the ground safety. I should say I'm actually an airplane pilot myself. I fly light aircraft. It's one of my passions. So actually bringing cyber and flying together has been a wonderful intersection for me. So can you hack a plane?
you don't want to hear the speaker coming up and say, I'm thinking airplane again. Like, is there anyone on this thing that knows how to land the plane? You don't want to hear that, right?
You really don't want to hear that. Actually, could a light aircraft pilot with minimal training land a large passenger jet? Probably not. Understanding how the systems works takes a lot of learning. Once you understand the systems, yes, it's not actually too difficult. You could set up for an auto land, take a bit of work, but once you understand the systems, it's doable. Just arriving up front, having piloted a small propeller plane, no chance. Absolutely no chance. It's just going to go wrong, sadly.
So let me ask you this, Ken. This may be a bit philosophical, but so currently the pilots, as you pointed out, have a vested interest in that plane, unless they're kind of wacky and they don't give a crap and they want to go down anyway. But so if we take them off the plane, there's now no vested interest. From a human perspective, do we increase the risk for people flying on autonomous planes? I don't know. Do we always need a person, even if they absolutely do nothing and never ever make a decision, but they're just there for insurance for the passengers to say that the company has somebody on the plane?
Yeah. So airplane autonomy is perfectly possible already. Right. It's been done. It can be done. What worries me though is let's take a comparison with automotive, right? We can connect vehicles, and we do connect vehicles, and there are security issues with those connected vehicles, and we try to make them autonomous, and they don't always do so well. And every time the next level of autopilot comes up, people take videos of cars doing silly things, right? If we can't get cars right, how do we expect to get airplanes right? So we're already connecting airplanes, and I'll talk through that in a little bit. How sure are we, at least when we've got a pilot up front and it all goes wrong, that pilot can put us back on the ground, even with almost all the instruments shot to pieces because they aren't working. The pilot can still get us down in almost every case, and I have great comfort in that.
As do I. As do I. So we've talked a bit about being on board, and so there are two or three separate networks, and you kind of have to have physical access. But you're talking, maybe you're going to go there anyway, but being connected. So there's air to ground, ground to air, air to air. I don't know if plane to plane or plane to satellites. And obviously we're talking about Aerospace Village here as well. That's a full ecosystem. That's not just one plane, right? It's a whole air traffic control and all kinds of fun stuff.
Yeah, so that's where things start to get interesting for us. Is we actually hired a couple of pilots who'd been laid off during COVID. So not only we see planes laid off, obviously pilots were having a hard time too. And whilst we know how airplanes fly, we know how flying's done, we know how navigational systems work, what we weren't fully familiar with were how what we call the standard operating procedures in major airlines. We didn't understand them fully because we don't drive big airplanes every day. We don't know how they're used, how they operate, how they're interfaced. And one of the big things that we learned all about was the concept of an electronic flight bag. Now, you probably remember back in the day, you'd see a pilot walking around the airport to an airplane with a great big black briefcase, right? And that briefcase contained all the charts or maps. It contained all the what we call approach plates, so how to fly the approach, the ground maps of the airport, so you know how to get there, and lots of other things like weights and balance, maintenance logs, all these important things, and they're heavy. And all those navigational maps and things, they get out of date every 30 days because something changes somewhere around the world, so they have to keep getting new ones on paper. So airlines, for very good reasons of efficiency and also weight, started introducing tablets instead. So all of those heavy paperbacks and navigational almanacs have been replaced by a tablet. And of course, that brought in a whole new set of interesting security issues for us. And that's where we've spent the last couple of years really digging deep. Now, this is a bit where things get a bit freaky. So I said you can't hack a plane, right? Well, you can't, but you can influence what the pilots do potentially. And you can feed them data that might lead them to do the wrong things. And a great example of one of the most important apps on a flight bag is called Perf, or Performance. Now, when you're sat at the end of the runway just about to take off, you might be surprised to know that pilots very rarely use full power. They don't use full thrust because it's expensive in terms of fuel. It pumps out a lot of carbon dioxide and it makes a lot of noise and it wears the engine. So you use the right amount of power for the runway you've got. So let's say your airplane's light, you haven't got a full passenger load, the wind's down the runway, you're fairly low at sea level, and the runway's nice and long. You might use nearly 50% of the available power because you don't need it, right? So the airplane trundles off, goes safely into the sky. But if you are at a high airport on a hot day with a full load of people and a relatively short runway, you might be absolutely caning the engines, but you don't do it very often. And the way that the pilots work out how much power to use is called a performance calculation. And they'll take in lots of data like the wind, the runway, the weight. There's 15 or 20 different things that you'll pump into a calculator that'll say, well, on this particular airplane, on this particular day, you're going to use 87% power. And then off you go. Everyone's happy. What we've discovered are security problems with those tablets and those apps that allow you to tamper with the calculator. So what happens is the pilots do their calculations, they get tampered data, and then get the wrong amount of thrust and pile off down the runway. And once you pass V1, you can't stop. You then get to VR, the rotation speed, but then you realize you don't have enough speed. So you try to rotate anyway, and instead of flying away, what instead happens is actually the pilot smacks the backside out of the airplane. And that can do a lot of damage. There was a case relatively recently where they bust the pressure hull. So they got to altitude, realized they couldn't pressurize, had to come back. And there is one very sad case where a pilot made a mistake and actually an airplane went off the end of the runway, killing everyone on board. Fortunately, I suppose it was a freighter, so the loss of life was comparatively small, but still horrible, whichever way you look at it. So we've been finding
I'm driving back
vulnerabilities
to New York from LA. That's all I got to say.
Well, look, let me give you some confidence. So, yes, pilots make mistakes, right? But our procedures are really good. They're really well drilled, and pilots will spot these problems, right? So if something's not right, they know what to do. They know to fix it. But the problem is no airplane incident happens by itself. It starts from a cascade. And what we're seeing is these sort of influences by giving pilots wrong data has the potential to start a cascade at every point. Something goes wrong, someone's distracted, something else was wrong, and instead of taking off, the plane goes off the end of the runway. Or in the case of an approach, doesn't land on it properly.
Wow. Well, it makes you think about a lot of things, actually, even when you don't fly, work remotely. All of a sudden, it's not just protecting the environment where you are at work, but protecting all the other point of access. And that's what you're talking about. Like, it could be that, it could be, I'm thinking satellite data that could be altered as well, and many other things. So, of course, we're here talking about RSA Conference 2023. You're going to be there with our friends, of course, at the Aerospace Village. We're ready to talk with Steve. We're ready to talk with a bunch of other people going to be there. A company that are bringing their own things to entertain and educate and teach to the people coming to the village. So tell us what are you going to talk about there?
Okay.
What are you doing at RSA conference?
So one of the problems we have is all these interesting vulnerabilities we find, which basically mislead the pilots. We can't do these for real on a real airplane because you run the risk of causing a crash, which is kind of not what we're about, right? We're about making things safer. So we went out and had some custom flight simulators built, which allow us to recreate all these vulnerabilities in a real world environment that's safe. So we've taken this with pilots, we've fed them the incorrect data as a result of the hacks, and then see what they do in a very realistic simulator. And on each occasion, they've either gone off the runway or realized there's a problem, rotated too early, added some extra power, and potentially had what we call a tail strike. So the great thing that we can do is we can bring these simulators to RSA, and we can let people experience them and fly the planes themselves. So most people actually just want to land one, but the real exercise is actually we take them through landing or taking off in a plane that's been tampered with, so they can see and experience how it actually feels. So see what a pilot has to experience themselves. So come and land our flight simulator. See if you can do it. See if you can put it on the runway.
I'm there.
That's fun. That's fun. Actually, I'm reading. I'm a big fan of NASA history, and I'm reading Apollo 8 now. But I've read other before. But actually, last night I was listening, because I listened to the book, about all the stuff that they used to throw at them, both of the control center and all the simulation. Because obviously, if you can't tamper with a plane, even less you want to tamper with a, with the Saturn V or any other big thing, the LEM or anything. And they were just talking about that, how it's a constant pre-flight for months and months of turning this off and screw around with something. And how did the pilot react? How did the command center react? And I think that now, thinking that was 1968, 67, or even earlier than that, and the possibility now, it's incredible what you can do with virtual reality, what you can do with simulation. I'm assuming it's incredible. Yeah.
So there's a really interesting point you raised there. Is about simulation and testing. And one of the things I think the aviation industry needs held up on a pedestal for is the fact that when something goes wrong, they share it. So when there's a problem on any airplane, any pilot incident, as long as the pilot flags it up voluntarily, there's no consequence for what they've done. So it means that every issue can be investigated to find out what went wrong. Yep, people have bad days, but it's usually something else that precipitated that. They were overworked, they were too tired, their transfer didn't turn up, something went wrong on the airplane, some information was wrong. And what I love about the airplane industry, aviation is wonderful because they share everything publicly. There's no blame attributed. And I think we could learn a lot about that in the cyber industry on the ground. What if we could share information about breaches without fear of retribution? What if someone's breached and immediately shares all the IOCs so everyone else can be there to defend and look for it? So yeah, someone has an issue, but everyone else learns from it really, really quickly. And I think that aviation industry is amazing because of it.
Yeah, I love that. And talking about learning, one of the big things about the aerospace village, and I want to get your thoughts on this, is the ability for somebody who knows nothing and somebody who knows a lot about something else to come in and say, here's what I know about my space. Let me see how I can apply that to aerospace. Or I want to break into the world of cybersecurity, and aerospace is a passion of mine. Here's a great way to make that entry. Talk to me about the team that you're bringing together, yourself, and how you kind of help the community grow and share information with each other to help move things forward, specifically around the aerospace village.
We love giving back, right? Our view is just keep paying it forward, because anything that we've learned, it might stimulate someone else to learn something cool. I remember the very first time we got the village together at DEF CON 27, crikey. And It was great. We took along some things that we had, some stuff we bought from eBay, some bits and pieces we had. We were learning about them. And then what I loved is that people would rock up and said, "Hey, I used to manufacture those when I was an apprentice back 20 years back." And they'd be telling us things about the technology that we had. So we were learning too. So it's really key for us. We just want to keep that two-way exchange. It's also really cool that industry's engaged as well. And that's a really nice feature of the village. Is I think the aviation industry were a little bit unsure of security researchers. There've been some kind of unhelpful media stories, and I think that kind of spooked the industry a bit. Security researchers, no, we don't talk to them. But actually what the village has done is it's broken down those boundaries. And now it's wonderful to see Boeing and other large organizations getting involved in the village and helping support, to the point where at RSA this year, we're doing a joint panel with Boeing, United, the Aviation ISAC, and ourselves. And you could not have seen that happen in 2019. And look how far the industry's come in something as simple as 4 years with some help from the village as well.
Super cool. And so you mentioned those devices. You have the simulator or simulators. What other things can people get their hands on besides Otto? I'm assuming Otto's going to be
yeah, don't get your hands on Otto. No. That's right. Yeah, so we've got the simulator. We'll also be bringing along some LRUs, some line replaceable units, so people can get their hands on some of the physical hardware that you find in airplanes, the places you can't ever go because they're down in the avionics bays under the floor. We'll bring some of those along so you can see what they do and how they work and take them apart. Yeah, they're quite old, but trying to buy new kit is frighteningly expensive. So we've got some kit, and hopefully we'll have some little CTFs for people to play with that we've written, so you can see how some of the aviation technology in the passenger cabin works as well.
That's nice. Really cool. And you have two talks, right?
Yeah, we've got some talks. So the talk we're giving at Boeing and United, the panel, is all about how both Boeing, United, and ourselves and others have engaged with the security research community. Instead of being scary individuals who hack planes, right? Actually, no. When we find vulnerabilities, we go and talk to the manufacturers about them. It's quite interesting. In aviation, it takes a long time to fix bugs. Now, if you found a bug in a consumer router or whatever, you'd probably expect to give the vendor 90 days to fix it, right? That's what Google Project Zero do. It's a reasonable timeline to get a bug fixed. In aviation, it takes 2 years. Now, it's not because they don't want to do it quickly. It's because it might take a week to fix the bug. It takes nearly 2 years to recertify the software to make sure it's safe. So that's a really interesting understanding that I think a lot of researchers hadn't got clued into. Is that, you find something, but it's going to take a long time to get it fixed for reasons of safety. So I think there were some researchers got really excited about the fact, they found these bugs, they weren't being fixed. The manufacturer was being slack. They weren't. It just takes time to get recertified.
Understandable. Big machines, a lot of stuff going on, and you want to do it right. Yeah. So I'm excited. I remember when we met you back at DEF CON and making thinking about what you said about involving the manufacturer, involving the legislator. I remember Sean and I were there when actually they were walking a bunch of people from Washington through the old, the car hacking village and the aerospace village, which at the time, I think it was the aviation village, still called that. And so it's exciting. I think big steps. I'm excited to be there. I want to invite, and that's why we do all these pre-event conversations so that we can, make people interested in what you guys are doing there and be like, hey, I'm there to work with the company, to meet the people at the expo, but this is something I want to put my hands on. So we invite everybody to come and visit you guys and get to chat. And again, an incredible team of people. We were lucky to know most of you, and always available to share, always available to introduce the topic to people that don't really know much about it. And Sean, it's going to be obviously during RSA conference, April 24th to the 27th, San Francisco at the Moscone Center. And that's where the Aerospace Village is going to be.
Yeah, we'll be there. I think we're planning to work with Steve and the crew to capture some stuff from the floor, right from the sandbox, and so we'll stay tuned for some of that. And hopefully, if you're listening, we'll get a chance to meet you there as well. So Ken, thanks for giving us an overview. Super insightful. I'm not sure how we never got that before, but great insights, and definitely makes me think, and hopefully our audience as well, so they can all come chat with you.
Great stuff. Look, thank you so much, and please come and have a fly of our flight simulator and see if you can land a hack plane.
There you go. I'm gonna fly the paper plane. I'm good. Probably better at that.
The Boeing paper plane, yes.
Yes. All right, everybody,
all right.
Stay tuned. Listen and watch all the other pre-event, and of course during the event we have a lot going on as well. And subscribe, stay tuned, and share with your friends, family, co-worker, anybody.
Yeah, your dog,
be
your
happy.
cat.
Yeah, of course.
Exactly. All right, thanks everybody. See you there.
Take care.